for several years, so he's got experience.
You better go home. If it goes more than an hour. Tell them not to put anything.
Unmute me.
order. We've got 6 trustees present and 1 on Zoom. Ann Halsey, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I'm here, Clem, thanks.
Good.
Special.
We're ready to begin our agenda prep for December 13th, next Monday's regular scheduled meeting.
Madam President, members of the board, good evening, and thank you for being here. Ooh, we're all still recovering. Item 5 for the board meeting on December 13th will be our annual public hearing to discuss the district's rating and state's financial accountability system. Ms. Garcia, Mr. Doyle will present that. We do that yearly. That's the first rating. We will have student recognitions. We talked in cabinet today about bringing lots of kids, but for the sake of our diamond line, we're going to highlight them in here this month, and then in January we'll have a bigger celebration for all our fall kids that did things, probably moving it over to the pack so we can space out and recognize them. But Diamond Line represented us in Dallas-Fort Worth, and we're on national television, and so we want to thank them for all their hard work. Mr. Doyle, item 7A will provide the ESSER 3 update, just kind of where we're at with ESSER 3. That's something we had said we'd come back just to do report only, and so he'll have his presentation ready. Item 7B, we've switched to just operations updates. Mr. Sandoval he'll do his monthly construction, but since he's over all of operations, we just decided to call them operations updates now. Dr. Baez will present a human resources update.
TASB's report.
Correct. We have TASB, the Texas Association of School Boards, presenting. Item 7D, y'all had asked for us to come back, so Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Sanders will have an academic update. We won't have the final grades for the high school since the semester won't have ended, but we'll have some information to present to y'all.
Do we have it in January, though?
We'll follow back up again in February so that we can do the final. I know the board likes to know about the credits and the attendance and all that. So, item 7A, approval of consent agenda items. 8A, approval of minutes from the regular scheduled board meeting on November 1st, 2021, November 10th, 2021, and November 15th, 2021. Item 9, items for action. 9A, discussion and possible action regarding retention payment. Dr. Baez, you want to?
So it is a resolution adopting an employee retention payment for all district employees through the 21-22 school year. Much like we've done in the past, 500 at
This.
December, and then 500
And this will be out of ESSER money, not budgeted money. Item 9B, discussion and possible action to approve the 2022-2023 academic calendar. Mr. Fernandez.
Yes, we'll present 2 options, option 1 and option 2. They'll be sent out to the public this week to vote on, like we do every school year. The majority will win, and I'll present those results at the board meeting next Monday.
Item 9C, consider approval of budget amendments.
We have one this month, and it's for special services.
Item 10, closed session as authorized by section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code. A, consultation with legal counsel regarding safety/liability concerns in regards to COVID-19 and matters related thereto. We will go into closed session and have somebody, a medical doctor present. And you can ask, the board can ask questions. Our attorney, Juan Cruz, will be back there, but we wanted to have it in closed session. Just for political climate, just to protect her. And then we need to, I had informed Mrs. Cantu, that we have to add another closed session item for a level 3 grievance, and we'll get that wording exactly from Mr. Cruz to put it in there. The grievant had agreed to move it to December, so we need to put that back in to honor the timeline.
Ms. Cantu,
Yes. Ms.
could we
Hanson?
add an update from Ed Rios and Rolando Rios on the 5.2 and 7.0 plans, just an update?
We need to have that added because they expect to come in with their final recommendations as of December 9th, I think. This Thursday will conclude theirs. They had a short meeting Thursday that just passed.
Oh, I thought
And-
they canceled the meeting. That's what my rep said,
What?
because Mr. Rolando Rios couldn't be there.
I can't hear you. What?
My understanding is that meeting was canceled because Rolando Rios couldn't be there.
Yeah, Rolando couldn't be there, but they had a short discussion, was what Ed reported to me.
So they're not going to have a finalized one till January, is that correct?
I have not heard from Mr. Rios whether or not they're going to have a final recommendation, but I had already talked to Dr. Cardona about the possibility of moving that action item to January.
Okay, could we at least have an update to see where they are?
We can,
Since-
yes, we can add to the agenda report from Ed Rios on the redistricting. You could add it to yours.
Item E, redistricting committee update, Mr. Ed Rios.
7E,
7E.
Yeah, could we have an update on both plans, the 5.2 and the 7.0?
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Madam President, that concludes the administration's report.
Okay. We have number 4, discussion and possible action regarding budget process and timeline.
Ms. Cantu, this is Ann. I emailed you another agenda item earlier today.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
See, there's
I
another.
had emailed you an agenda item today to include.
Oh, yes, yes. We have another item that Ms. Halsey has suggested we add to the agenda, discussion and possible action regarding, so it'd go under 9, discussion and possible action regarding an equity specialist, is that what she called it? As an equity specialist? Ms. Hal-
Officer. It would be an inclusion and diversity officer who would oversee the next rounds of the equity audit and then also work with administration and staff to implement the recommendations and whatever programming comes out of those equity audits and manage the day-to-day issues with students and staff that involve inclusion and equity as they arise.
Okay.
I put discussion and possible action regarding the inclusion and diversity officer. That's it.
Thank you.
So that would be 9D.
Yes.
Anyone else have an item to bring forward? Anyone else?
Ms. Cantu,
Mr. Arredondo?
thank you. First, I think the technical difficulties that Ms. Halsey is experiencing are why I made my way down here. I wish at a future board meeting we could finally figure out Zoom after 19 months of Zooming in across the district. So I'm not going to hold my breath for a number of reasons, but I just think I need to share that I really wish we would get the technology situation taken care of in this chamber. I don't think it sets a good example when we ask our staff to operate virtually and we can't figure that out here. Second, I am supportive of Trustee Halsey's request for a chief diversity officer or having the conversation around that issue. At a previous board meeting, I brought up the topic of a chief medical officer, and I was told that that would be best suited for the budget process to ask that those funds be allocated. I'm fine talking about it in December, but I guess as we get to the agenda items or discussion about what the budget process and timeline is, I would like an answer from staff of when in that budget process and timeline those conversations are going to take place. For instance, if we talk about hiring some type of district-wide medical professional, or if we talk about allocating funds for someone to oversee diversity and inclusion and things of that nature, where in the budget process that is going to be taken care of. So those two things are kind of just kind of housekeeping, not really agenda items. But my agenda item request is discussion and possible action regarding employee incentive for the COVID-19 booster shot. That's my agenda item request.
Okay. As far as budget process and timeline, I had requested that be placed on the agenda, and I know that Dr. Cardona sent us an email with a schedule of meetings starting, is it
The first
January?
agenda prep.
Well, throughout January and forward from there.
Well, and historically, the way those agenda preparation meetings have gone is we're given kind of a one-pager and says, here's how all the money's being spent. Do you have any input? And I think that's historically been the process. It isn't a reflection of the administration or anything. It's just the cake has historically been fully baked, and then the board says we're going to either give raises or not on a deficit spending level. So I'm just curious if there's a way to see what these budget workshops are going to entail before we attend the budget workshops, and if there is a conversation about this board allocating funds for some of these positions or programs that board members want to see, where in that process is it going to take place, or where is that opportunity for that conversation going to happen?
Do you want to answer that?
Well, the great news is the item's titled Discussion and Possible Action Regarding Budget Process Timeline. So, the thinking was, and I had met with Trustee Halsey and Ms. Cantu, was to do the first meeting as just a refresher, 101, for the new board members, and also just a refresher of where we were at 5 years ago and how we used to budget, and now how we actually budget, the revenue streams and all that. So the first one. The second one being, which would answer your question about when do we bring positions up, would be at the end of January to discuss personnel, since that's about 85% of the budget. Now, it's all dependent on the December calendar approval, because that triggers, and they can speak to the logistics of, once the board approves the calendar, then they can start building out the employee schedules, and then we'll get a better idea, and they can explain the nuances if you want to dig that deeply into it. But the rest of the meetings are subject to what the board wants us to prepare. So this isn't about us bringing, we don't have a CFO, so I thought this is a good chance for all of us to kind of build it the way I think it makes sense for the community, both inside and outside, so they understand it. So you tell us, and we'll be ready to present.
I know one of the biggest part of the budget is personnel, and the question always comes up is whether there's going to be raises, what percentage of raises, and that's one of my big concerns with regard to our budget. If we're going to be able to, or if we're not going to be able to, I think that that's something that the board needs to tackle at the very beginning, at the onset. Once we have the refresher course on the budget process, I think that's the biggest item, since personnel takes up the largest part of our budget. The big decision is to give a raise or no raise. And at the same time, we're trying to work with personnel's calendar, because people need to know what they can expect in pay, because some people may be looking based on whether or not we give raises, and those districts around us, they compare their salaries to those districts around us. And this happens every year, that we lose people to Hayes or Seguin or New Braunfels. But I know we have a tight budget, and I know that we have to be real careful this year. At least from my point of view, as one board member. Is there any other question or discussion on budget process and timeline?
I do have a point of clarity on the memo you sent out, Dr. Cardona. You said February 28th was also an agenda preparation already scheduled budget workshop?
For the March board meeting,
Okay, so we're doing that agenda prep on February 28th?
yes.
Okay. So there's only one unscheduled, no,
One-
the January 31st is budget workshop only?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then we can move on to item 5, discussion and possible action to modify board policy BED local. And this has to do with the public forum and the number of minutes that are allowed. At this point, the president pretty much decides how many people are going to speak based on the 3-minute limit. And another option would be to look at it and decide if we want to limit the number or limit the amount of time. And so I know that we've had one time when we've had a lot of people, but back before, the rule was that the board president could group them and have them come up 2 and 3 at a time and one spokesperson. But now it's up for discussion. I know, Mr. Arredondo, you had a recommendation. I know, Dr. Sami, you had some comments. Ms. Halsey or anyone else want to bring any discussion
Ms.
on
Cantu?
policy BED local public forum?
Ms. Cantu?
Yes.
Thank you, President Cantu. I don't per se have a recommendation. I just, whatever process we agree on, the only issue that I have with that process, if there is a mechanism to modify it based on an individual's discretion, like regardless of the issue, whatever that might be. If there are 5 people who want to talk about something or 15 people, I don't want just one person to have to be able to have the ability or the authority to say they all have 1 minute or they have 2 minutes or that they have 10 minutes apiece, right? So whatever decision we ultimately make, I hope the policy reflects that it has to be a collective decision based on a majority vote of the board if it's something different than what is outlined in board policy. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. When we had the mask mandate, and I think we only had 10 speakers, if I remember correctly, we let them each speak their 3 minutes. We didn't try to manipulate or control the amount of speakers or the amount of time, because 10 seemed to me a workable number. And since usually we allow about 30 minutes for public comment, well, if we had 50 speakers or 40 speakers, then that's when we have our issues. And this is when I think either the board as a group decides, or the president, if you all decide that the president should handle it, and figure that the easiest way to handle it would be to let either the board vote quickly. I just don't want to see us having a long discussion or debate on the dais while we have 50 people waiting to speak. I think that gets unruly. But that's my opinion as one board member. Dr. Sami, you had something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I found the difference between the 2 options provided in our updated board operating procedures on page 5. There's option 1 and option 2, and the difference is the person who decides. So in option 1, it's the presiding officer who may adjust the public comment proceedings. And in option 2, it is the board, suggesting to me that it would be a board vote that would adjust that. And I'd like to move that we adopt, well, are we looking to adopt this now? I'd like to move that we adopt option 2.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt option 2. Any discussion? Ms. Hanson?
Do we need to have Mr. Cruz in here? I mean, can we
We could call him in if you
have a
like.
vote?
You wrote
Before we
this,
actually
right?
He
get in-
provided these options to us.
I'm just asking a question. Do we have the ability to vote on something before we even get into the agenda? That's what I'm trying to ask. He just provided what was offered by some trustees.
He's in a meeting, we could, Georgianne, will you text him and ask him? We have a motion on the floor that we go with option 2. Any further discussion? Any other questions or discussion? Did you have questions for legal counsel? That's why you'd like him to be here?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that voting on this by the board, that's what option 2 says, right?
Yes, it's the president versus the board.
Right.
President make the decision or the board makes the decision?
Usually we don't have a vote before public forum. That's why I was just questioning this, to make sure it would be okay.
He went to go get him.
I'm assuming it is, but I don't know for sure. I'm assuming it is okay, but I don't know for sure because we've never had a vote.
Right, and
Before we get
this is
into the
going to
agenda.
lead, we'll need him because the next item is the modifications to the board operating procedures. And so he wanted to be present and talk to us about some of the things that have been recommended and changed.
Right.
So
That's my
if he comes
understanding.
right now, that's okay.
It's like back in the back,
Mr. Cruz, we
backstage.
have a question.
That was a surprise.
From the board, we have a motion on the floor to adopt on page 5, option 2. And we're in the process of discussion, and Ms. Hanson had a question for you regarding the option 2 on page 5.
Would we need to list it differently should the board decide to vote one way, not to change the time or not? Would it have to be listed on a public forum as a possible vote by the board?
No.
Okay.
It's kind of something that, like I mentioned the last time, usually if we've had Clem do it on her own, we'll just go around and saying if there's like 50 people here that want to have public comment, then she could say, who's going to be the speaker and maybe reduce the time. But I think Miguel was saying, let's have that done, but instead of just one person cutting the time from 3 minutes to 1 minute, have the board do it as a motion. And that doesn't have to be specifically
Democracy.
listed as a motion.
Okay,
Or, yeah.
that's what I wanted to make
Sure.
sure.
Any other questions? Ms. Halsey, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nope, I'm fine.
Okay. No further questions? Call for the vote. Yeah, she won't be able to vote because she's,
Is she allowed, she's not allowed to vote because she's not on screen, correct?
No.
I'm eligible to vote, and I vote yes. I vote yes.
No, Kathy, and you have to be visible, so.
Okay, hold on.
So,
I see her.
there you are.
There you go.
Yes, you can
There's
vote.
my hand.
now we can see you.
You're a ghost.
So now you're legal to vote.
Yes.
Call for the vote. All in favor, please raise your hand.
7.
I can't see your hand, but I can see it. Now I can see it. Thank you. 7, opposed, 0. Item 6, discussion and possible action to approve board operating procedures.
Yes. So if I can, I think you have copies, right, Georgiana? Everybody has copies. So we're gonna go over, and they're, for your convenience, highlighted, so they'll be easy. On page 1, we have 2 options, as we had discussed the last time. One is kind of the option that I put together based upon our discussion, and option 2 is the one that Dr. Salmi proposed. So let's go over option 1 if we can. First of all, if any board member wants an item included in the agenda, it now says it has to be a written request. So that's the first thing that you see there. The second point is that you would have to submit your agenda items 4 calendar days before the date of the board meeting. Why? Because that's what BE local states. But if you want to have 7 calendar days, you can also do that. It's up to you. But right now I put 4 because that's in line with board policy. And then moving forward, it says that you should have 2 board members place an item on the agenda. But I did note in there that your policy says that any board member, 1 board member can place an item on the agenda. So that you need to discuss whether you want to have either 2 board members be able to put something on the agenda or just 1 board member. And then once it is submitted for inclusion on the agenda, then the policy basically says that the board president can include the requested agenda item at an appropriate time in the near future. So that's very open-ended. So what the board operating procedures, it's a little bit more restrictive, that once Clem or whoever else serves as board president gets a requested agenda item, then it has to be placed on that, on the next agenda, the next meeting following the agenda item submission. And finally, on that, first section is that the district administration will provide to the board members all the board meeting backup material 7 calendar days unless there's exigent circumstances that would not allow for that. So usually you'll get it within 7 calendar days prior to your regular meeting. So that is in short option 1. Dr. Salmi proposed, Dr. Salmi, and you can jump in here at any time, is basically also to have a written request submitted by any board member, but that the board agenda items should be submitted the noon of the date the board meets to conduct agenda preps. So by today, conceivably by noon. And basically the board president shall ensure that those items that are submitted will be on the agenda to meet the board meeting date. And that the president shall have the authority to include items on the agenda that are not presented at your agenda prep if they relate to the welfare of your staff, your students, or exigent circumstances require otherwise. And the same thing, that the district administration is going to provide your materials 7 calendar days prior to your board meeting date. So I'm not sure if you may want to kind of talk about these 2 options and which the majority of the board feels more comfortable with. Either option 1, option 2, a hybrid, or whatever you think makes more sense the way you operate.
Questions or comments? Ms. Hanson?
My concern is about getting the materials 7 calendar days prior to the board meeting. I thought we were going to try this out for a couple of months to see what kind of hardship it places on the staff. And also, when we have board meetings the following Monday after agenda prep, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
because
see your point.
that happens more than once a year. I mean, it's usually 2, sometimes 3 times a year.
Right.
So with those
We'll
just
be meeting next Monday for our regular board meeting.
right, so,
So there's
I
really,
mean, I don't mind getting things early, and if it's not, I don't want a bunch of, the day of the meeting, a bunch of new things that
See,
weren't
and-
ready in time.
we have the agenda for next week, but it's all the backup material that takes up so much time for
Right,
everyone to
right.
get.
Preparing the board
And-
books.
I see your point. Did you have a point, Dr. Sami, you wanted to make?
Well, I did. The first option has agenda items being submitted 4 days prior to the meeting, but the agenda materials being provided 7 days prior to the meeting. So items that are added on the fourth day before the meeting wouldn't be in those materials. So it seems a little problematic to have items added so close to the meeting if no materials could be prepared. And regarding the undue burden on staff, I think moving the expectation for when materials are provided could just be done by preparing those materials ahead of time. The majority of the materials that we receive are things that we receive every meeting. And so I think it would seem to me that we could just request those earlier, and that doesn't seem like it would produce an undue stress. The only other thing was that in the option 2, the fourth line from the top, the president shall ensure that an agenda item requested by 2 or more board members submitted by noon. I would request that be available to just one board member requesting an item if they're requesting it by noon on the day of the agenda prep. Not to require 2.
Not to require to. I know that we've got a form that has been used, and then we've had people just send an email with the second person just following up, saying, I support this item being placed. So we need to also decide if we're going to use a form or just an email is sufficient. For me, an email has been sufficient, but the next president may think something different.
I think so long as you have it in writing in whatever format, I think an email is probably the easiest way, especially if people are tied up and to,
Working.
print something, scan it, so on and so forth. I think it's just the email is just the most convenient thing.
Yes, Ms. Villapando?
So if two people have to submit it, how do you know both have to send an email?
Right. Like today, I received an email from Ms. Halsey wanting this item placed, and then I had a follow-up from Mr. Arredondo saying he was interested in supporting that.
I did.
Mr. Arredondo, did you have something to say?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Cantu.
I think it'd be great to have I think it'd be great to have the board book and all supplemental items and information provided a week in advance. I understand that sometimes we ask for things that are time sensitive in the sense that staff needs more time to gather the appropriate information. Like, for an example, inoculations when it comes to vaccines, right? I guess for me personally, as we have these conversations, if there isn't consensus from the board one way or the other, I guess my request would be that when the board book is provided the Friday before the meeting, so what it's historically been done, the 3 days in advance, that board book be complete with all presentations, all supplemental documents, and that we effectively end what has historically happened for the past 6 years across various administrations and staff people, is that, we get an update from a campus and we're shown a chart from, academic data, but I can't see it, and it's not provided in my board book, but it's on the screen, and we'll get it later, right? Like, that doesn't do me any good after the meeting, after the staff member has made the presentation, if I see that academic data 4 or 5 days after a board meeting. So individually, I'm supportive of Dr. Salmi's request. If that's where a majority of the board goes, that's great. My lift is a little bit lower, which is just that moving forward, the expectation and the requirement is that the board book be 100% complete, including any and all presentations that are going to be made during that upcoming board meeting. That's where I am, but I would look forward to hearing other people's comments on this issue.
Ms. Villalpando?
My question would be to Dr. Cardona. We're all talking board, wants this and this, by a certain time. What about the staff? What time do they need to prepare?
It just depends on the item. So, asking for campus information from a principal to present data pulls them out of what the board wants. And, sometimes they are working on it till Sunday and Monday trying to prepare. And sometimes they're working, we have a little bit, I say we don't have a lot of time, but we have more time than campus people do. And so, I would agree with Trustee Salmi if she's sticking to the 7 days. I hear trustees saying he would expect, but I would expect then we're going to hold ourselves accountable to not doing what traditionally has been done in the past. And that's, we have agenda prep and then 4 more things are added right after.
Right.
Now, we can't say that's not going to happen. We've had issues with the city when the city brings stuff to us. And, I think the board as a whole understands that sometimes things just happen. Like the contractors that we work with, the vendors that come and present, sometimes they don't give us the stuff. So when you see it, it's typically sometimes the first time we see like the first rating. We won't get that probably till that Monday, but we have committed amongst ourselves to get us as much stuff as we can to y'all so that I think we're pretty transparent as it is, but yeah, it is frustrating when you can't see it on the board, so.
It's my opinion that we shouldn't be requesting things that the staff can't provide within that period of time that we're asking. Period. I'm sorry. That's my opinion.
That would be reasonable, but I think most of the stuff, if that's what the purpose of the agenda prep. So if we know we have a week to get stuff together, I think we can do it. It's going to be the outside people that come like TASB or whatever. We can, I guess, in the contracts, they give it to us, but sometimes they have their own timelines because they work with 30 districts and as such, but.
You mainly have control of the district personnel. The outsiders, when they come and give a presentation, that's hard to have control over that.
I'll use Mr. Sandoval as an example. He tries to get the latest images of construction, like possible, because he knows that's a sensitive topic with board members and stuff like that. So he tries to get you the most accurate picture. But if he has to move that back to get it, that's what he'll do. I think y'all will know, this is a week later. So there's probably been more progress on the projects than what he shows you, so.
Dr. Salmi?
Yeah, I think it's important that we hold ourselves as a board accountable to not adding things to the agenda for requesting items in a last minute kind of a way. So, yeah, I support option 2, and I'd like to
if it
make-
doesn't work, I'll come back and say, man, it's kind of overwhelming our people.
Absolutely, and we can readjust it, and we can address it then.
Absolutely.
So for right now, do we want to vote on this, or we just have consensus?
Maybe, consensus is fine. I hear option 2, Dr. Salmi's option, and then cut it down instead of 2 board members, just 1 board member to be able to submit an agenda item, okay? And then, if there's no other, then I can go to page 2. Oh, Miguel.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. My only follow-up to this, and I understand the intent of this conversation is to clean up board operating procedures and board policy. So if this is done, is there not, and I apologize if I'm jumping ahead, language in board policy that allows 2 trustees up until, I think, 7 days before a meeting to require something get on the agenda, which kind of runs afoul of what we just talked about right here? So are we gonna fix that here in a minute? Okay.
Yes, so once we have this, then we're gonna go back and change BD local to make sure that it's consistent with your board operating procedures.
Okay.
So page 2, real quick, at the very top, there's the two options. We're just going to concentrate on Dr. Salmi's option at this point, which is option 2, that talks exactly what you were talking about just a little bit earlier. No item can be placed on the board meeting agenda after the agenda prep unless such item requires immediate attention because the agenda item relates to the welfare of staff, students, or exigent circumstances exist. Okay, so that's kind of what I hear the discussion be. And then also on 2, on number 4, in terms of distributing information to the board members, it's going to be clarified that it's the superintendent or the staff of the superintendent's office to send you all the backup materials, the scheduling of your regular and special call meetings, and any agendas to the board members at least 7 calendar days prior to the meeting. So that'll be clarified. And then on number 8, with respect to reports, information reports, then those reports should be submitted from school district employees to the board members at least. This is something that you all touched upon 7 days prior to the meeting, unless it's not feasible. And I think Dr. Cardona mentioned about an external person. That may be the TASB situation, or an engineer or a financial advisor that comes here to the meeting with materials that they weren't able to get to you 7 days beforehand. So on page 3, the only really significant part there about if you have a question about agenda, it says number 3, requests for additional materials relating to the regular board meeting agenda items shall be made at the agenda prep meeting, which is kind of consistent with what you're talking about, getting information at the agenda prep meeting instead of getting it afterwards.
So, I'm sorry. So we would get, I'm confused about that one. What additional materials would we be getting at agenda prep?
Requests for, like if you are talking about, let's say, a new campus or new facility, but you have some information here, but you want additional information, then if you're going to request additional information, request it at this agenda prep meeting.
Okay, I thought
so that they could be ready for the regular board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So page 4, I'm not really going to go over that because there's nothing there really. On page 5 is what I think we discussed a little bit earlier. This is when people want to come to the board meeting and address the board. And at the very top, I put some new language that's tracking the statute that says, at regular board meetings, the board shall permit public comment regardless of whether the topics on the item on the agenda posted with a notice of the meeting. At all other meetings, public comment is limited to the items on the agenda posted with the notice of the meeting. So this is pretty customary, that's pretty standard, right? That you have the public be able to comment on your regular meetings on anything that relates to school district operations, but at your special meetings that it has to be items, if they're gonna do public comment, then items on the agenda only. That's what consistent with your BE local policy. And option 1 and option 2 is what we discussed the last time. Like if there's 50 people here and instead of giving everybody 3 minutes or I think, 3 minutes, you want to cut it down to 1 minute. Option 1 is the board president can make that determination upon herself or himself, whatever may happen in the future. And option 2 is what Trustee Arredondo said, that you can cut down the minutes, but you should do it by a board vote. So,
That's the option.
And we've already
They
voted on
chose
that.
one.
yeah.
We took a vote on that.
So, and then I also stress that at all board meetings, public comment shall occur at the beginning of the meeting. And you may think, well, why is that even needed? Because actually the new law states that county commissioners, city council meeting, school districts, you can have public comment at the top of the agenda or during the, when the agendas are, when the items are discussed. I think that that's just very unruly to have public comment at all times. It should be at the top, and that's it. So that's the way it's written. Then page 6, nothing there. 7, we can skip as well. It's just kind of typos, so we're kind of cleaning up. Page 8 as well. 9, the same thing. 10, nothing there. 11 is blank. 12, there is just kind of a statement in terms of if a board member is going to speak to the media, obviously you do not lose your First Amendment rights by being a school board member. But if you're going to talk about something relating to the school district business to the media, just make it known that it's your statement and you're not speaking on behalf of the school district. The one that's usually the spokesperson for the school district is either the superintendent designee or the board chair, okay? On page 13, that's just grammatical stuff, nothing for you to worry about. Page 14, the same thing. The page 15, there's really nothing too substantive, only the evaluation of the board. The evaluation of the board is something that's mentioned here. Some school districts do it. So what I sent to you is the evaluation instrument that we put together. That, we've seen what TASB has put together. If you want that, we can give it to you, but it's very big. I think what we did is an instrument that is much more workable. It's simple. Do you have to do it? No. The law does not say you must. I do think that it's good because everybody else is held accountable, that you yourselves create yourselves as a body as to how you're doing. Whenever you want to do that, it's not subject to any confidentiality. Once it's done, it's not like the superintendent's evaluation that's confidential by law or any of these certified administrators, right? Yours would be a public document that you would display either on your website or keep it somewhere if you choose to do it. I gave you an instrument. I'm not going to go over it with you. I do suggest, though, that you study it and, hopefully you all think that something that you could use. Page 16, there's also nothing substantive there, as well as 17 and 18 are just blank. On page 19, we did add something specific about if, number 6, in terms of removing a board member from office, we track the language of the statute. And the language of the statute says, in case people say, well, why, how can a board member be removed? Number 1, he or she could be removed by the electorate when it's time for election, or number 2, a district court judge through a petition that is filed, not the school district. It has to be a third party out there, and it has to be for specific things listed in the statute, and that's straight out of your board policy, okay? So that people don't bother you about, how to remove a board member. It's in the policy, and it's also now just repeated in your board operating procedures. The violation of the board operating procedures is basically the last, and we didn't make any changes as well. So that is pretty much, in short, the revisions to your BOP. But like Miguel did say, once you put this, if you decide to move forward with the changes, then we would have to kind of come back and clean up BED local and bring it back to you so it's consistent with these changes.
So you'll bring us a cleaned up copy for January?
For BED local, yes.
Questions or comments?
I appreciate consideration of these changes. I think that they'll make our ability to evaluate things. Mine personally, it'll give me more time to think thoroughly about things. So I appreciate the board's attention to the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz, for your work.
Yes.
And we'll look forward to the polished copy so we can approve.
Do we need to vote to approve it?
Yes?
Okay, before we do that,
I would need a motion.
Ms. Cantu,
Yes.
before we do that, I'm getting tired, so I'm not going to perform on this one like I normally would. So section 5 for member decorum and social media policy.
Page
As page number 6 from my colleagues. As the most active member on social media of this body, I've always taken issue with this policy because I feel like it was explicitly written and implemented by a former board to police my actions, and, I'll say if the shoe fits, maybe it does, right? So I'll admit that. Some of the language in this policy for me is very vague and open to interpretation of a majority of the school board, like lewd, obscene, or otherwise inappropriate behavior on social media, right? I think our definitions of lewd, obscene, or inappropriate behavior is very different and is always changing depending on our age and background and experiences. And so I'm going to vote against this policy implementation as a whole because of the section that is specifically related to social media. I think there have been some issues in which I have made it public my frustration with some of my colleagues and the way that we vote and the way that business is done. And I have been told, that is in violation of board operating procedures. And I agree, it is. But we're elected officials. This is politics. I have the right to speak to the voters and my constituents however I want. And while I do believe that we should conduct ourselves with professionalism and decorum and all of those things, I think that this policy is kind of redundant and punitive, and like some of us are not on social media, right? But I could still talk poorly about Dr. Salmi at HEB, and that's totally different than talking poorly about her on social media, but there is no policy in here that says I can't talk poorly about a colleague one-on-one or in a community setting, right? So the fact that we are monitoring social media, which I feel is extremely transparent, and at least it's on record and it's there for people to see, good, bad, or indifferent, at least somebody's willing to put their name on it when it's social media. But I think some of us in particular have had very colorful conversations with some of our colleagues in public settings and at church and at other functions, and there's no policy in here that prohibits that kind of behavior. But we specifically say it's not allowed on social media. So that's kind of where I am.
Other than to say that we're bound by our board ethics, that's at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just saying that we explicitly enumerate not to talk poorly about each other on social media, which I think is targeted at the trustees who operate and post things on social media, but we don't have a carpet policy wall to wall that says we will just not talk negatively about our colleagues in general, which we know some of us have done before in the past, just not on social media. So that is where my frustration with this segment of the policy is, because I think it's a targeted implementation of policy and language against some of us and not all of us. And so, anyway.
Kind of, if I can, I think if somebody violates the board operating procedures, then it's there in your, kind of at the very end that it's a sanctionable action, right? So if the school board sanctions a school board member and it's, oppressive to his or her freedom of speech, actually right now the United States Supreme Court is taking up that issue for the first time ever. And what happened in Houston is that the Houston, I think it's a college that sanctioned one of the board members for his conduct outside of a board meeting, and he thought that, just like kind of what you're saying, it was a freedom of speech, this and that. So he's now before the United States Supreme Court, and the court's going to have to finally give us an opinion, like how much can either county commissioners, city council, or school boards regulate the conduct of their elected officials outside of a publicly posted meeting. So I'll send you that whenever that decision comes up, but that would be in line with, I think, if somebody would take umbrage to whatever is posted by any 7 of you on social media, and, you know, we want to sanction, I think we're going to have to look at that. Is that even sanctionable now? And before, it was really a toss-up. Now you'll have a decision by the Supreme Court that says, yes, this is something that's sanctionable, or no, he was displaying his First Amendment rights, or she was displaying her First Amendment rights, so therefore you have to leave it alone. You may not like it, but you have to leave it alone. So that's just give you a little bit of comfort that there is a decision on that specific topic coming down the pike.
Well, and to follow up, Mr. Cruz, I think even at that, a sanction bears no repercussions besides that of community scrutiny and maybe some local press coverage and things like that, right? It doesn't remove my ability or anyone's ability to vote on an item or to attend a board meeting or to exercise the powers granted to them as a school board member. So again, I think just this whole, I think this policy and the creation of these board operating procedures was created during a very difficult time of the school board, and it was meant to, I think, corral us collectively, and I understand that, and I will acknowledge that, but at the end of the day, like, I would hope that we are all mature enough to conduct ourselves like we should. But even if we're not, I mean, Mr. Cruz has already said it, that there's kind of two mechanisms that can hold us accountable in an actual tangible way. And that's the voters not reelecting us, or the voters petitioning to remove us from office. So, I mean, we've seen where these board sanctioned votes have been used to go after colleagues, and again, I don't think it does anything to accomplish the mission of the district. So anyway, that's kind of where I am on these board operating procedures. I understand why they exist, but again, I think they were created more to police and punish each other than to make us operate more cohesively or collectively. At least these sections that police our behavior versus outline how we operate as a board, right? Like, I think there's a difference. How we put stuff on the agenda is pretty black and white, and then how we monitor each other's behavior and or punish each other for our behavior are two totally different things. So I wish there was some separation between those two things, but I digress.
I have a question with this, with your comment. I was thinking, do we have some kind of student decorum and social media policy as part of our school student code of conduct?
Student and staff.
Student and staff code of conduct. So it's similar to what we have here?
This is more political.
I mean,
Ours is more.
yeah, our students are required to be here, our staff are paid to be here, and we were elected by the voters to be here, so we're not operating all on the same. And again, like I said, I understand, and I won't harp on this much longer because I think I've talked too much as it is. But again, this has always been a policy that I feel its intent was written to police individual board members on this dais. And you take this policy and the implementation of consequences to its conclusion, and this is solely political. You either act right or we sanction you, which doesn't do anything besides make you look bad in the eyes of the public, which doesn't do anything for anyone. It doesn't stop the behavior. It doesn't stop the behavior from happening again. It's just around and round as we go. So,
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to make a comment? We're ready to
Ms.
vote?
Cantu, I do.
Oh, yes. Ms. Halsey?
Thank you. So I agree with Dr. Salmi's recommendations for the timing and the timelines. I also agree with Trustee Arredondo that that portion of the policy is overzealous and it would be sufficient just to make a general statement about board members conducting themselves appropriately on social media. And I think really that's the extent that's necessary. My only concern that we haven't talked about is if we have an item that comes up after the agenda prep, that it says now that it could be put on if there are exigent circumstances, but we previously had to have 2 board members put that on. And I think that having those 2 board members in that case has been helpful. So I would recommend that we reconsider that up until the day of the agenda prep, anybody can put it on. After that it does need the support of 2 board members. Also, to the point of the timeline, I think that this is the only month, December might be the only month where we're going to have the board meeting, agenda prep the one week and the board meeting the next week. So I think we should be fine on that count.
So I think that.
Dr. Sami?
Sure. The specification in the exigent circumstances is relating to student and staff welfare. So I think that the situation we've gotten ourselves into is that 2 board members request items up until the board meeting several times. So I'd like to see us keep the policy as written for option 2, that anything that would be placed on the agenda after the agenda prep meeting would have to be that related to student or staff welfare.
I think that that's the problem, is that then you come into the question of whose discretion. So at least you'd have 2 board members that would ostensibly be holding each other account to say that it did fall under those circumstances.
I see.
Otherwise, whose discretion is it at?
I see. So those items are, I see, decided by 2 board members as being related to student or staff welfare.
Correct.
I'm okay with that.
Ms. Hanson?
So if we come to agenda prep, we can't place anything on the agenda at the meeting? Is that,
I thought that.
it have to be done by noon?
Not according to this. Because if you show up to agenda prep and you haven't, if I heard trustee Halsey and there's 2 of y'all on the dais and you agree, then yes, you can add it.
But only if it's exigent circumstances.
Correct.
So we'd have to
Or
have.
relating to the welfare of
Yeah.
staff or students.
So we'd have to send our agenda item
Prior.
by noon of that day.
Yes.
Okay, we would have to make sure we get the agenda along, the regular meeting along with the special call meeting agenda ahead of time. So we know what's on the agenda.
It's the 7 days prior.
No,
When
you're
we're
not.
going to get the board book.
Oh.
No, I'm talking about this.
Are
We
you
got the
talking about
agenda.
formulating the agenda?
We got the agenda today at the board meeting.
Right.
If I have to put something on it, I have to do it by noon.
Yes.
But how would I know if I don't have this along with this at the same time?
Okay, now you're talking about, we need to get the agenda prep
We need to
7
get-
days prior to today's meeting. Are you talking about the regular agenda? The time between here and here is 7 days, more
Same
than,
time. We get this agenda ahead of time.
right,
We have to always have this too at the same time.
correct.
Okay.
They should have been sending them together at all the time,
Usually
because
that
otherwise
happens.
you don't know
Exactly.
what is and what isn't on it.
Right, usually that happens.
It shouldn't. I usually ask that it be sent, that they both be sent.
Okay, I'm not saying anything about Ms. Logue or anybody else. I just want to make sure that we get both of them. Because otherwise, I don't know what.
Otherwise, you don't know what's on here.
Right, so I don't know what, I mean, I was even thinking today, well, I'd like to add this, but I don't know if it's already on the agenda or not.
It's on.
That's no reflection on you.
Are we ready for a vote?
Well, and I also want to say, I'm going to vote for this, but I want the superintendent to come back. If this is a burden, having it 7 days advance, I'd like for you to let us know, because I don't want to get a bunch of add-ons at the meeting that, oh, this is going to correct this, because that, to me, doesn't give me enough time to prepare, to look at the differences.
I think the issue will be who determines what's exigent,
Yes.
because that's going to continue
That's
to create
key.
problems. Because if 2 board members feel that something's exigent after agenda prep, but it's not really, if we haven't defined it, then we're just going to keep having the same issue.
But
Right.
it does say that it's the board president shall have the authority to include items on the agenda that are not presented at the agenda prep if such items require immediate attention because the agenda item, so it's because of the welfare of student staff, exigent circumstances. So it goes back to the board president really making that determination.
Yes.
And I would probably make that, as president, I would make that determination in conversation with the superintendent. Or whoever is president should have a conversation with the superintendent to decide if it's that important to add. Because if it can wait, then it can wait one more month. Mr. Redondo?
Yeah, just because got like my second wind here. This change in policy does not prevent or negate the ability of two board members to call a special called meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Cruz? So the conversations about like a item that might be pertinent to student health or staff welfare, like I don't have any concerns about that caveat. I'd be fine tightening it up for the purposes of, moving forward on this item. But similarly to the mask requirement vote that we had, that was Trustee Mejia and I who spoke with President Cantu, communicated our request of having a special called meeting, and at that point, it was just the 3-day posting requirement that we needed to meet to that threshold so that we could meet in person. So I'm fine with this as presented, because if something dire were to come up, there is still a mechanism for two board members. If it is based on the student and staff welfare, they could just call a special called meeting, which I think at that point, if those two board members think it is that important for us to meet outside of our regular calendar, then that's on them, right? So anyway.
Now, but one of the things that you should know that under BE local special call meetings, once it's submitted by two board members, it doesn't say that the board president has to do it within so many days. So once it's submitted, then at this point, I'll just use Clem as an example. Clem can take it, and it could be 1 week, a month. It just depends, what the discretion of the board president on that, so.
Ms. Hanson?
I would like to request that should we have a special call meeting, that the superintendent or his designee polls all board members to see if they're available to meet on whatever date is suggested, or give dates, because.
Options.
Yeah, because the last one, 3 of us didn't know anything about it.
You didn't know about it because it wasn't sent out.
I'm just saying, 3 of us didn't know anything about it.
I'm supportive of like increased communication, but if we're gonna implement some policy that prevents two board members from calling a special called meeting and implement, we got to poll all 7 of us to see if we can meet, that is essentially giving each individual trustee like veto power to have that special called meeting if they say I can't attend, right? So if we go in that direction, I want us to vote on that and make sure that it's a majority of the board's decision to do, but I just want us to be cautious about implementing new caveat policies because one board member said, let's do that. So if we're going to start making suggestions like that, I would ask that President Cantu have the entire board vote to implement some type of policy like that.
But the policy right now is not that. The law is, once you have 4 board members, then you have a meeting. And, hopefully, I think if you're going to evaluate the superintendent, I always say 7 board members should be here. You're going to do something of consequence, but if, you need to have a meeting and 4 of you available and the other 3 are not, and you have to buy desks or whatever, then just have that
But shouldn't all
meeting.
board members be notified?
Yeah, that's part of the,
Okay,
number 4.
that was my question.
Ms. Cantu? Can I move that we adopt?
I'm ready for a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we adopt the amended board operating procedures with the agreed-upon options as presented to us by council.
Do I hear a second?
Second?
Dr. Sami moves that we approve the board operating procedures, a second by Ms. Villalpando. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor? please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ms. Halsey, is your hand up?
Yeah, it looks like it's.
6, opposed, 1. Discussion regarding redistricting timeline. I think we kind of talked about it when we first got here. The committees have met. They're hoping to finish up this Thursday. And we have said we've added to the agenda a report from Ed Rios. What other questions or discussion do we have on that item?
Ms. Cantu?
Yes.
Just as a follow-up to that, so I know that there was some discussion at the beginning of this meeting. So my first question, is the committee, to the best of your knowledge, going to make some type of presentation and recommendation to us in December?
To the best of my knowledge, they are.
There's been no communications to,
I have not talked to him since, I didn't talk to him this last week, but I will have a conversation with him because we need to make sure that he's going to be here at next Monday's meeting. So I will
Okay.
have a conversation with him.
okay, wonderful. I guess that's really, I've heard different things, you know, obviously talking to my appointee. I know there might have been some breakdown in communications between our attorney, Mr. Rios, and the rest of the committee about his presence and participation. But to my knowledge, the committee has met. They have reviewed the iterations of maps that have been proposed and presented. They provided their input. I guess my second question is, and this is more based on why we embarked on this journey in the first place, does this board foresee us receiving the recommendation as is for both plans and not modifying the lines at all? Like, we're going to see it and then we're going to approve it. And I ask that because if there is an individual on this board who wants to change that, I'm open to that conversation, because obviously their recommendation is just that. It's a recommendation, right? The
Purely a
board gets
recommendation.
final approval. But as we talk about this item, I just want all of us to be on the same page that if we essentially say this board is allowed to move the lines or change the lines at a future board meeting, like, I just want us all to be prepared and ready for those conversations. So I guess that's my question, right? Like, do we see that action taking place? And if we do, I want the 7 of us and staff to plan accordingly. So that's having Mr. Rios here, having his technology here, allotting time for us to have those conversations. Because I mean, I'll put some money on it. I think there's going to be people who want to move stuff around the night of, and I don't want any of us to be caught off guard at that request. So I just want to make sure that whatever timeline we commit to tonight and moving forward, staff and my colleagues have planned accordingly. So
I'm going to request that Mr. Rios also be present next Monday so that we can talk about it. Initially, we thought we'd be making a decision in December. I don't think that that's realistic. I think that we need to have time to look at the divisions. The first discussion has to be if we're going to stay with 5-2 or we're going to go to 7-0. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around it. I do not want to rush through this process. I want us to take our time and make sure everyone has input on the board. Just as that the advisory committee has had several meetings, I want us to have plenty of time with it.
Right.
Sampson?
Ms. Villalpando had her hand up
Ms.
first.
Villalpando?
Oh, my concern with what Mr. Arredondo is talking about is that Mr. Rios, well, Mr. Rolando Rios.
Rolando Rios.
It's not Dr. Rolando Rios.
No, he's
Okay,
legal
Mr. Rolando
counsel.
Rios.
The lawyer.
I'm sure after the recommendations from the committee, which we appointed, have to do it by the demographic in each district. And so if we start moving lines around, wouldn't that change it?
No, I agree with you 1,000%, Trustee Villalpando. I guess my personal expectation would be the lawyers and the committee would do what they would need to do to propose 2 maps that would check all the boxes for what needs to be required demographic-wise. But during the conversations of appointing the committee and embarking on this process, it was said time and time again that this committee is only a recommendation. It's only a recommendation, and that the board has final approval. So I'm acknowledging those comments, and it would lead me to assume that people on this dais plan to modify the maps as proposed by the attorney or the committee the night of. And if that is the case, I want us all prepared for that conversation and to be ready to weigh in on that process. And that means having Mr. Rios, the attorney Mr. Rios, here with the computer and the software to do that accurately. So that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Individually, if it came to us as a proposal, we decide 5270, we have the maps, yes or no. But I'm under the impression that people might want to move the lines, and so I just want us to be prepared for that conversation if it comes up.
My understanding was that he sent some maps that had the 7 areas, and all of that can be manipulated through the computer. I mean, if you start moving a line, then that's going to throw off the next one because he has to keep the numbers correct.
Well, my question then is, you said 7? Are we doing, is it 7 or is it 5 and at large?
I think that's the first vote that has to take place.
Okay.
The first vote has to be, do we want to go with 5, with 2
At large?
at large, or do we want to go 7 single-member districts? That's the first vote. Then you start with the maps, because he has a 5 plus 2, and he also has a 7.
Okay, so he's
So
gonna have 2.
he's kind of generated models for both votes.
Okay.
Ms. Hanson?
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Will we get both proposed maps for our Monday meeting
We should.
to discuss, not to vote on, but just to discuss and look at it? Because don't we have to let the public know too?
Yes, that's one thing that I understood, that we have to have a public hearing for
Right,
the
and then-
people to come and give us public comment.
Is the last day, Mr. Cruz, that we can vote to go 7-0 Friday, January 7th
Correct.
of 2022? Okay, so we have December, and then we have to do something before January 7th. We have to vote. If we're going 7-0.
Interesting.
That's why I told you the last time that you're gonna have to have probably some special call meetings to get this done because it's an ambitious timeline.
Right.
Ms. Cantu?
Ms. Halsey, did you have a comment that you had sent to me regarding this?
Yeah, so I wanted clarification along those same lines as Trustee Hansen about the requirements for public input. But then I also understood that there is an option here that we don't take action in time for the next election cycle, and then we would have to take action for the next election cycle. Is that also correct?
What was the question again? I didn't.
Like grandfather in the
the
plan
question-
after May.
For next
Right,
election
if
cycle.
we can't
But it
complete
doesn't
it
have
to- You can't do
before
it for
the
this election.
requirements for this election cycle.
So would the same 5-2 we have right now stay in place? Because that doesn't,
Yes.
That's
If
not
you
based
don't
on
do,
the-
if you don't meet your January 7th deadline, then what you're gonna have is the current method of election of trustees for your May election.
even though it's not
But that's not against
based
the law or
on current
anything, is it?
census.
Right, it's gonna be based on your current census.
It's not.
The mayor
No,
election.
Rolando's gonna bring you an option for 5-2 or 7-0 based on the current census. So what you're gonna have is, kind of the way you elect trustees right now, right? 5-2, based on the current census, and you can vote on that. Or if you wanna change it to 7-0, then you can do it, but you have to do it before January 7th, 2022. or
So-
at least meet that deadline.
We would have to vote on the new 5-2 if we can't meet the Friday, January 7th deadline for 7-0.
No, just
But that's my
Friday,
question.
Friday,
That's my
January
question.
7th is
What happens
only
if we
to
don't meet
create
that
your
deadline?
single-member districts. Friday, January 7th is only to create your single-member districts if you elect to go in that fashion.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the redistricting and for 5-2 or 7-0, that's a little bit further down the line. That is, let's see.
Trustee Halsey, you were saying something, but we couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was saying, what happens if we don't meet the January 7th deadline?
Then you're gonna go to 5-2 for May, you know, that's, you
With
stay
the
with
current
5-2 for
lines,
May.
The status quo stays
Lines of things.
until
And what's
you
the deadline
change
for
it.
that?
We don't have it here, but we'll get it to you.
Ms. Cantu?
Ms. Hanson had her hand up.
I'm still confused. And I'm sorry if I keep saying this over. But we would have a new 5-2 plan if we don't do the 7-0.
Correct.
Okay, so we would still have to vote on that plan? Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to
Mr.
clarify,
Arredondo?
because I didn't want to keep the old one.
No, you'll have.
So
a new
you're
one.
good.
Yes.
Mr. Arredondo?
Yeah, so the GI Forum sent us a letter expressing their interest in us transitioning to what the original court had asked us to implement, which was 7-0. So since we're still here in agenda preparation, Ms. Cantu, I'm going to request that the board vote on either a 5-2 or 7-0 form of electing trustees at our December meeting. Because right now, we're asking this body to make two plans that meet all of our expectations. And I think the idea is that they're going to show us two and the various lines that those would represent, and then we still move forward with two options, but ultimately, we're just going to decide on one, right? So I think we're asking them to do twice the work without deciding on which option we want to pursue.
That's why I said the first vote is to find out, are we going 5 with 2 at large? Are we going to go 7 single-member districts? That's the first vote.
So if
And if we choose the 5 with the 2 at large, then we would not have to meet that deadline because
So-
we're basically keeping the status quo.
So in December, I'm asking that we vote.
Want that on the agenda?
That we vote on either a 5-2 plan or a 7-0 plan in December.
Can you add that
Mr. Reed?
agenda item?
We will prepare two orders for you. One of them is going to be the order to create your 5-2, and the other order to go into the single-member districts. So you will basically meet your January 7th deadline in December.
Can we, I guess, before we move forward and hopefully to address even the concerns that I have, can we decide on the method of election without implementing the lines? So like at our December meeting, we say, we're going 5-2 or 7-0. Lines to be determined by January 6th.
Yes, sir.
Is that possible?
Yes.
So in December, we could just decide which option we want to pursue for the future elections.
Correct.
Okay, my second question, connected to the first item. Mr. Cruz, in this opening of elections, changing the way in which we conduct our elections, and because our elections are based on a court order, do we have the opportunity to move our elections to November?
You would have to get the approval of the
GI
American
Forum?
GI Forum. Mhm.
So the board could potentially vote and say, you know, we are moving to a 7-0 form of elections if the GI Forum agrees to move our elections to November.
Right, right.
Will you
We did it,
provide-
remember, for this last time because of the COVID and stuff like that?
Yeah.
It'll be the same process.
Okay,
We
I just-
reach out to American GI Forum, get an agreed order, submit it to the court. They don't even require hearing. They didn't require it then, and just get that signed.
So I'm asking that discussion and that conversation and potentially that vote be included at our December meeting as well, so that we decide either 5-2 or 7-0, and in those conversations, because we're essentially in negotiations with the GI Forum at this time, seeing if they're willing to compromise on a 7-0 plan if we move the elections permanently to November.
Okay.
Since legal counsel is present, this question, my understanding is that we have to have a public hearing on the vote, whether we're going 7-0 or 5 with 2 at large. So that would mean that we'd have to have a public hearing for that meeting next week,
For the
so
December,
that we would have public input before we vote on the 5-2 versus the 7-0, because I thought that that was part of the process. I heard Rolando Rios say something about public hearing.
yes, I think this is just gonna be more like, we want to move in this direction, but if the vote goes forward in December that you are interested in going to 7-0, then you're gonna have to go, before you adopt the official order, go through the public hearing and then adopt the order. The order is what requires that public hearing beforehand. So if you just kind of want to get people on the record, whether they're even interested in this 7-0, and I think that's what maybe Trustee Arredondo wants to do at this point, we'll craft an agenda item without the adoption of the order, because then you're going to have that public hearing and the order adopted after that.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we followed protocol, because I remember him saying that we had to have public hearings.
Yeah, no, we did it over at Clint ISD. They moved from, at large to single members and stuff like that, and we have to, one of the things that I'm not sure if people have told you, we stress this, remember that if you go 7-0, you cannot go back. That's it. You're gonna be stuck forever and ever with 7-0. You can go from 5-2 to 7-0, but you can't go back to 5-2 if, for whatever reason, this board or a future board feels that 7-0 is not working out. That's it.
Ms. Hanson?
Prior years, we could only change to November at certain times because the state allowed it, or I'm not sure who, TEA, somebody allowed it. Is that gone away? That we can change our election date?
Yeah, you can only have the election either in May or November.
So we can change and move our election without getting permission from the state or TEA? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you said a while ago we had to get permission from GI Forum.
Right, but I'm saying from the state.
Talking about, yeah,
About the state, okay.
If the election's changed to November, can it be changed back to May in the future?
Oh, you just
I
said no.
don't think that there's a mechanism for that. I'll check that out, though.
Thank you.
When you find out, you send an email to us.
Sure.
Ms. Cantu?
Yes. Yes.
If we decided to stay with 5-2 now, could we change to 7-0? When would it be our next opportunity to change to 7-0?
Your next election.
Next before the next
The
election
next
cycle.
election or next census?
No, next election. You can,
Next election.
yeah, you could change, just like we did it, we did the El Paso Clint ISD board changing from, their method of election about 2 years ago. So, the method of election is different than the redistricting process. The only thing that's causing a little confusion for you is that you're one of the few boards that is just trying to do both of them at the same time. But, and to answer your question, yes, if you decide, this is too rushed, let's just stick with 5-2 for now. Let's get the redistricting max from, Rolando and see how that looks, and then go forward with your 5-2 with the new maps. You can do that, and then say, let's pick up in March or April with possibly changing the school district to 7-0 at the next election, and then you go through that process, and you could start discussion, voting, public hearing, and all that in March, April, June, whatever.
Okay, that's helpful because that's not how I understood it previously. But my next question then is, say that we vote next week to stick with 5-2 and we move forward, but we are unable, so you come back and you say that the deadline is January 15th or whatever. What happens if we are not done on January 15th?
January 7th, didn't you say
January
7th?
7th. That's
No, you said it was January 7th if we go 7-0. But you said if we didn't get it done by then we revert to 5-2. I'm saying, what happens if we don't get the 5-2 with the new lines drawn out by whatever that deadline is? What happens?
you have to meet the deadline. In order for you to call your election with 5-2 with your new maps, you have to meet your statutory deadlines. You know,
Okay,
there's
and do
no
we have to have a specific public input date by that deadline?
For your redistricting process, I'll check on that, and I don't really think that that's necessary at this point. It's only, the public
Okay.
hearing is triggered when you're changing your method of election, not necessarily the redistricting process associated with it, so.
Okay, but
and
can
I'll
you
get
confirm that?
I'll
Because
send
I
you
just
an
want to
email
make
on
sure that we don't
I thought we
miss that deadline, right? Like, that seems,
on the new maps.
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll make sure that you don't miss that deadline. I mean, we've been
Okay.
pretty much sending these, notices out and calendars, and we'll include those.
Before,
I don't want to just not miss it. I also want to make sure that we're giving people, the required time that they have to give input, as well as informal or, some time to give input if they want to. We're not making it, at the last minute of the 11th hour.
Mr. Redondo?
yeah, before we adjourn, Ms. Cantu, I would be comfortable deferring to the board president, vice president, and secretary for y'all to work with Mr. Rios to come up with some informal but formal timeline for this process between now and January 6th or 7th. If that, the first step is a vote one way or the other on Monday, and then a special called meeting afterwards, whatever that looks like. If you, Ms. Halsey, Trustee Mejia, and Mr. Rios, citizen of San Marcos, Mr. Rios, not attorney, Mr. Rios, come up with something for the entire board to be updated on, I think that would
You're
help.
saying Ed Rios.
Yes. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll entertain a motion for
I move to
adjournment.
adjourn.
Second.
Can I make one announcement?
Yes, you may.
Y'all already know the announcement, but I'm going to make it anyway, so it's on record, that I sent y'all an email about Mental Health Day.
Kids are pretty excited.
So December 17th will be a Mental Health Day. We have plenty of days, and thank you, Mr. Fernandez and the calendar committee. And so our staff and students are really tired, and we're going to stop school on December 7th. We won't have school on December 17th. We'll reach out to School Fuel because they're supposed to send, so they need to move it up. So we'll reach out to them.
Okay, we vote. All in favor of adjournment? 6, 7.
Who was the
Opposed, 0.
second? Who was the second?
On the adjournment?
Has anyone ever been opposed to adjourning?
I think it was Sami. Sami, did you, Sami,
Get out of here when we voted again.
Sami, did you second the adjournment?
I think we both did.
Yeah, Dr. Sami can have it.
Give it to Sami. Our sick person has to go home. Thank you, Ms. Halsey.
Thanks, y'all.